Do you believe that MMA has very few rules? Then you're wrong. Compared to the old days, today's game has a fixed set of rules and norms that all should follow. There was a time when ball punches, fish hooking, hair pulling, and punches to the back of the head were all legal. Do we have to tell you why these moves became illegal? Yeah, for obvious reasons only. In this video, let's see some of the precise moments that forever changed MMA rules. Number 10. Groin shots. Inspired by the UFC, the IVC or the International Vale-Tudo Championship held their first event in 1997. The former UFC fighter Gary Big Daddy Goodridge fought Pedro Octavio in the finals. Eye gouging and biting were deemed illegal, but groin shots were approved by the Brazilian organization. Goodridge struck at his opponent's groin, and this resulted in Pedro falling to the ground in discomfort and pain. All this led to Goodridge getting the stoppage victory. Thankfully, the IVC created a specific rule preventing a fighter from reaching their opponent's trunks for the following events. The infamous ball smashing occurred at UFC 4 in a fight between convicted gang rapist and murderer Joe Son and Keith Hackney. This alone wasn't enough to enforce an immediate rule. It took another 3 years to come up with a rule. Number 9. Throwing an opponent over the cage. The 1996 fight between Tank Abbott and Cal Worsham resulted in an instantaneous creation of a rule. As the fight started, Abbott, who had a bench press stat pound of 600 pounds, charged towards his opponent, Cal Worsham, but to everyone's surprise, picked up his 230-pound opponent and almost threw him out of the octagon. Tank Abbott was pretty close, and Worsham, in an interview, said that only his heel and padding saved him from the embarrassment. In the end, Tank got the victory, but the potential for a fighter to fall 6 feet head first onto a metal platform should be avoided at any cost. John McCarthy made the ruling within the UFC to disqualify those fighters who try to throw their opponent over the side of the cage. It should be noted that fence grabbing should also be banned. Number 8. 12 to 6 elbows. The most common reason that this straight up and straight down elbow is banned is that athletic commissions were afraid of seeing stunts by martial artists breaking a bar of ice or something with their hands. But this is only a part of the reason. According to Big John McCarthy, who was there when the first official unified rules of MMA were created, said that this one technique was banned due to a single fight. In 2000, the 6'10" Titan Gan McGee squared up against a much smaller opponent, Brad Gabriel, at the IFC Battleground. Unluckily for us, the footage of this fight is not available online. Gan, who later went on for the US Heavyweight Championship, crushed his opponent with these repeated downward elbows. A doctor present at the event advised John McCarthy to ban this elbow. Initially, the doctor advised to ban all these elbows, but it was decided to ban only this downward elbow movement. Thus, the single match resulted in banning the 12 to 6 elbow techniques. Number 7. No more Speedos. There are not many other sports that have a gender disparity than MMA. It's the main reason we got ring girls and non-matching mic types parading around the fighting cage, unless you're an Invicta. In UFC 133, Dennis Holman not only fought inside the octagon, but also ended up showing a bit more skin than usual fighters. His opponent, Brian Ebersol, couldn't make things weirder with an arrow shaped on his chest. Plus, Holman wore an extremely small pair of blue trunks, claiming to have lost a bet to his teammates. Dana White was infuriated with these and said that it was disgusting. He guaranteed that no one would ever fight in the UFC dressed like Holman. Holman's contract was never renewed by the UFC. Although Dana White made it clear that it was not due to the Speedo incident, we can understand why he was released on winning streaks. Number 6. Short grabbing. In the match between Pat Milwich and Mikey Burnett for the inaugural welterweight title back in 1998, both men's shorts became an important element throughout the fight. We can see that during the entire match, both the fighters had a firm grasp of each other's shorts, which resulted in a boring time for the viewers as neither of the fighters was able to break away very often. The crowd found the whole match pretty comical. John McCarthy had the inevitable task of having to fix Burnett's shorts. Thus, short grabbing became immediately banned for obvious reasons. Fighters are no longer allowed to grab their opponent's shorts during the fight. Number 5. The introduction of TKOs. The initial UFC fights ended up in only 3 ways: knockouts, submissions, and cornermen throwing in the towel. But these general rules were not biased in the inaugural UFC event when Gerard Gordeau landed a big head kick to the sumo fighter Taylor Lee and sent his tooth soaring into the front row. The original referee understandably realized the danger and consequently, the fight was stopped. But the UFC founder was extremely upset with the stopping and didn't want stoppages at all. The loser is out completely cold, or they quit by themselves or their team. And unlike the inaugural match, This rule was followed blindly until Pat Smith delivered some hell of the elbows to Scott Morris, but due to the rule, the referee was helpless to stop the fight. Understanding the danger in these situations led to the advent of referee stoppages from UFC 3 onwards. Number 4. Vaseline Gate. In combat sports, you can see that Vaseline is applied to a fighter's face, and it is reapplied in between the rounds. This is done to minimize the friction from incoming shots, and Vaseline helps to reduce cuts. Up until 1994, this practice was continued. But you know that Vaseline jelly is quite slippery. George St-Pierre's cornerman illegally applied Vaseline to his shoulder, chest, and back, and this raised a question of whether this was a genuine mistake or if he was trying to cheat. His opponent, BJ Penn, was equally infuriated by this action, and even Dana White had an octagon-side rant. This eventually led GSP to get toweled down at rounds 3 and 4 by the members of the commission. The hubbub related to the Vaseline issue made UFC make a permanent rule in which no independent cutmen are allowed to apply Vaseline on fighters, and henceforth the UFC will provide one cutman for each corner of the fight. Number 3. Lay and pray. After their first fight in the UFC 1, both Gracie and Ken Shamrock won various titles and tournaments before their rematch. The UFC's first poster boy Gracie won the UFC 2 and 4 titles, while Shamrock went and conquered Pancrase, picking up the inaugural title in Japan. Thus, there was a significant level of hype before the rematch, and fans were excited for the event. Instead of a hot fight, everyone saw an inactive and boring fight, where Shamrock lay inside in Gracie's guard, just avoiding submissions, mostly, and barely taking the risk to land much on the ground. The laying action continued for a whole 36 minutes. The fight was declared a draw. In combat situations like this, the referees were given the power to stand up to the fighters for their inactivity from the following event. This was a useful rule, but unfortunately, this has also led to a set of questionable stand-ups since then. On top of it, overtime limits were also adopted. Number 2. Introduction of judges. The old UFC brass was not in favor of the introduction of judges, as they thought that they had solved all issues by refereeing stand-ups and overtime and preventing draws. 68 of the total 69 UFC fights ended with a finish. There were no problems until the match between Ken Shamrock versus Oleg Taktarov at UFC 7. The fight didn't finish despite referee intervention. Ken's shoes were taken, and eventually the fight ended in a draw. The decision was controversial, and the follow-up event in UFC introduced judges to take decisions along with a 15-minute time limit to push the actions further. Number 1. Hydration test. Hydration cut is one of the ridiculous practices in the sport, and December 2015 proved this practice to be tragic. The 21-year-old Chinese flyweight Yang Jianbing tragically paid the ultimate price for this insanity and died from weight-cutting complications. It was extremely sad that it took a precious life for the ruling to be changed. The championship made drastic changes in its weight-cutting protocols and made use of hydration tests to eradicate weight cuts. That's it. What do you think of the before and after of these rules? Let us know in the comments below. Also, hit that like button if you enjoyed this video. For more content like this, subscribe to our channel and stay tuned. Bye-bye.